Hello, welcome to step 3 out of 7 total steps for tracking production from the field using Edge on site. Today we will be focusing on arguably the most important step, which will tell you how to track your quantities. So let's get right into it. Last video focused on showing us how to get our pages all downloaded and ready for tracking. And so now that we have these two check marks next to our pages, we know that both these pages are available to be used for tracking. So what I want to do is just select which page I want to go into. Let's start with this Camillus Wall and ACT page. So I will just tap my finger on the name of the page and enter into it. Now what I'll see is the background image that comes from the edge, and I will see a list of all the codes contained inside this page on the left as well. If I take my finger and tap this conditions button, I will see it change to a list of the conditions inside this page. And if I take my finger and I tap on one of these conditions, I will see all the shapes that are associated with that condition. So this is coming right from the Edge estimator. And to explain it all to you in depth, it starts with you adding conditions to a page within the original estimate, and then drawing takeoff shapes associated with those conditions, shown here. Here's all the area shapes for our 2x2 acoustical system. If I were to take my finger and tap this plus sign, I will see all the labor items that this condition is set to produce. And that's all based on how it's set up in the condition properties and which items are turned on and off, et cetera, et cetera. And so once we had all these labor items on the labor screen, they were grouped into codes. And that's the codes that we see here. So if I tap one of these codes, that's how we're able to show you all the different shapes associated with it. It's essentially a walk backwards. So it's up to you how you like to track your production, whether that be from code or condition. We'll look at a little bit of both. Let's start by code level, as that tends to be the most popular with field personnel. Let's say we wanted to mark off some production for interior framing today. So when I tap framing, I'm going to see all the shapes for this page in which interior framing labor is required. So what I want to do first is I want to select the shape in which I want to mark production for that day. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my thumb and my index finger and press them to the screen, and I'm going to zoom towards the shape I want to get a better look at. And I'm going to use this shape in the bottom left here. So there I go. And now I'm all zoomed in. What I want to do now is what I said before and select the shape that I'm working in. So I can do this one of two ways. If I want to just select a singular wall, I can just tap with my finger on that wall. And you will know it is selected once it turns a red color. And we can keep referring to our legend in the bottom left-hand corner to understand what these colors mean. Red means selected. And if I want to unselect it, I can just tap it once more and then a second time. And it will turn back to blue, meaning it's unselected. Another thing I can do if I want to select more than one wall at a time is I can take my index finger and drag it across the screen to create a selection box. And any shapes that are encompassed by that box will become selected. So I can do that by either encompassing multiple shapes in that selection and them all turning red as shown here. And that goes the same for deselecting shapes. I can do the same. So let's start with just selecting one wall and marking production. I'm going to go ahead and select this wall by just tapping on it. And now what I want to do is I want to tap that wall a second time. And what that's going to do is produce a crosshair at the very top of this linear foot wall partition here. And if I take my finger and I press on that crosshair and start to drag downwards, it'll allow me to create a visual representation of the production that's actually being done out in the field. So once I get it to where I want it, if we said that we framed a little more than half of this wall today, then this would be about accurate. So to save this entry, now we're going to hit the production button in the top right corner. And this is where you come to review the data that you're going to be entering. So here is the labor contained inside this framing code. And we see how many estimated hours it'll take to complete this framing labor coming from the Edge estimator. Initial quantity tells you the initial amount of quantity you had completed for this wall, which since we haven't marked anything yet would be 0. And it tells us that what we're adding with that 55% is 9.96 lineal foot, shown here in this fraction format. If that all looks good, we just want to hit save, and that green shading will now be saved. And if we look in the bottom left of the legend, we know that that shading indicates completion. So that's how to mark completion for a lineal foot shape using the crosshairs. Another way that we can mark production is by using the production slider, and that works a little bit differently. So let's mix it up a little and let's select more than one wall. I will start by dragging to select this wall in the bottom left and also dragging to select this wall in the top right. And I'm going to hit this production button right away. So for this method, we're no longer tapping a second time to get the crosshairs, but we're merely selecting our shapes and then hitting the production button immediately after. And now we have a 2 next to this labor item, and we see some different numbers for the quantity. And that's because we now have 2 walls selected. So it's showing us the data for both of these lineal footages. And so now what I can do is I can use this slider here in lieu of the crosshairs to mark a completion percentage for these 2 walls. So I can take my finger and drag that slider to represent the percentage complete that I would like to mark. So here I dragged it to 80%. And if we look at the initial quantity, here's the 9.96 that I entered in initially for that one wall. And now we're adding 12.08 total lineal footage. And it shows you a percentage of the total. Notice the 27.55 lineal foot represents both of these partitions. So if everything looks good, now I can hit save. And we have effectively marked 80% completion for both walls. And you can see that the green shading for each of these partitions is now at about 80%. So we've now seen 2 of the 3 total methods for tracking production. Let's look at the last one. So let's work with this wall on the bottom left again. If we select it here, it'll turn red. And again, we're going to hit this production button. And what we can do is we can take our finger and tap right where it says 14 out of 18 right here. And what this screen allows me to do is enter in an exact quantity or exact lineal footage to mark as complete. So if I want to say I did another 3 lineal feet, I can type that in and hit apply. And once it catches, it's going to say, okay, here's your additional 3. Here's the total percentage that you're approaching. And if I hit save, it's going to save it the same way. So those are your 3 options for tracking production. You can double tap a shape to produce the crosshairs and create your own visual representation. You can select the shape once and hit the production button and use the percentage slider, or you can select the shape once, hit production, and tap the fraction to enter in an exact quantity. So now we've looked at tracking by code for lineal foot shapes, and we've looked at selecting one shape, more than one shape, and all 3 methods of tracking production. Now, let's look at tracking things from a condition level. And let's say instead of a lineal foot shape, we want to go ahead and track a count condition. Let's use this 2x2 column as an example. If I tap 2x2 column, I'm going to see all the 2x2 columns on the page here. And I'm going to zoom in and just look at these ones towards the bottom here. So let's do a multi-select. Let's draw a selection box over these 2 shapes here. So now I have these 2 columns selected. One thing to note about marking count completions is that they automatically turn green instead of red when you select them. If we hit production here, we're going to see a multitude of different labors. So these are all the labors that are required to complete a 2x2 column here. And if you notice, everything is automatically jumped to 100%. And the reason we do that is because no matter what that count condition is, whether it's a column or in the case of roofing, a VTR, any type of penetration, we are assuming that you are not going to leave the job site without completing that penetration or count condition item for the day. So we automatically jump it to 100 for you. And so if that all looks good, you can just hit save. But one thing we can cover here is that there's any of these labors that were not completed yet or that you didn't want to catch this 100% completion, you can go ahead and use this checkbox to uncheck it. So if you built the entire 2x2 column, but your supervisor hasn't come out to supervise anything yet, you can uncheck that supervision box, and when I hit save, supervision will not catch that completion. And so let's visualize that. Let's use the plus sign to break apart our 2x2 column, and we can actually look at completion for this column in the case of each labor item. So for the finishing, we see that the shapes are marked green, meaning our finishing for these columns is complete. But if we scroll down to supervision and look at the shapes, we see no green shading. And so this is just showing that the application allows you to filter by labor item and see the completion for individual labor items as well. Okay, so now that you understand that you can track as, very micro or macro as you would like to, you've seen it by condition or by code, and you've seen it with lineal foot and count conditions. Lastly, we want to look at how it works with area shapes. So let's also simulate that we are done working in this page for the day and we'd like to enter into another one. So let's hit the back button and let's go into this Walgreens page now instead. And here we are. And if we tap roofing labor, we're going to see the area shapes drawn in the takeoff for this page here. So let's do some more practice and go through our tracking quantities, which will work the same way for area shapes, just looking a bit different. If we tap this shape once, it'll turn red. And if we tap it a second time, we will get our crosshair in the top left-hand corner, which if we take with our finger and start to drag, will let us create a visual completion shape, similar to the lineal footage, except here just looking a little bit different because it's inside this area shape. I am able to take the top left corner of that shape and manipulate it so that I can take this completion shape and make it as representative of real life as I would like to. Once I get it to a point that looks accurate, I can hit production. And again, here's all the labors inside this roofing labor code that are being marked. And if all looks good, I just hit save. And there we go. So I have just marked completion for this area shape. So you've seen how to track production from code and condition level. You've seen how the completion shading looks on count conditions, lineal foots, and area shapes. You've seen how to enter completion for all labor items inside a code or only certain individual labor items inside a code. And you've learned the 3 ways in which you can input your production. Thank you for watching, and please stay tuned for the next video of the 7-step series.